Today we're going to be talking about a piece of functionality in Aucerna Execute called data synchronization. Obviously no surprise, but Aucerna Execute contains many different lists of things. We'll have lists of partners and accounts that will be used when we're setting up AFEs. We'll have lists of users, AFEs themselves, jobs and wells, lots of different stuff. And sometimes these lists or part of the data in these lists isn't owned by Aucerna Execute. There might be another system that is the system of record for that piece of information. For example, partners and accounts typically are owned by the accounting system. Data synchronization allows us to leverage those lists from that source system without having to rekey all of that information in Aucerna Execute. So we're going to go through a simple example here, and we're going to talk about synchronizing the list of partners in Aucerna Execute with the list of partners from an accounting system. No surprise that, again, the accounting system typically does have a list of partners or vendors or business associates. They'll often have, a unique identifier, a company name, address information, that kind of stuff. And we know that when we're creating a new AFE, part of setting up the AFE is specifying the working interests and the partners on that AFE. But what we don't want is for users to be hand typing in company names. One, that's frustrating and annoying, but two, it introduces errors, potential spelling mistakes, different capitalization, whatever, that cause issues in the future when we try and run reports or when we're building integrations. So we know we want users to pick companies from a list of acceptable companies, but we know that list really is owned by the accounting system. And so data synchronization allows us to synchronize that list in Execute with the list from the accounting system so that when there are changes in that source data, maybe an address changes, a new company is added, those same changes are automatically made to Aucerna Execute. So that's data synchronization. Let's talk a little bit about how it works. And we're going to jump into a little bit of the weeds here, but we'll try and keep it fairly high level. So if we start off by looking at kind of the structure of the two systems, the list of partners in Aucerna Execute is fairly flat. We have our partners list, and each partner has a code, a name, an address, email address, some other attributes. Whereas the accounting system might be a little bit more complex. The accounting system's vendor table isn't just joint venture partners, but it'll be all of the vendors that we deal with. So maybe there's a flag in there that says whether or not this particular record is a joint venture partner or not. We might also have support for multiple addresses. So we have a separate child table, the vendor address table, with one of those being marked as the primary address. Furthermore, maybe we've got some differences between the two systems. In Execute, the code or the unique ID is a string, and in the accounting system, it might be a number. So what we need to do here is build a query or a view, and we'll get DBA's help with this, that takes the data from our source system and massages it a little bit to more closely match what's in Aucerna Execute. So in this example, we're taking our numeric ID, turning it into a string. We're filtering out only the primary address and only the JV partners. So the end result is that we get output from this query or view that more closely resembles the data structure that Aucerna Execute has. We've just got a code, a company, and a single address coming back. Now from here, we're building a mapping table that associates the fields or the columns between these two different views, what's in Aucerna Execute and how that maps to what's in this query and view. And then critically, we have to outline one of those fields as our key, the thing that links the records between these two systems, because we want to know when the synchronization runs if a record already exists, and if it does, we want to update it, otherwise we're adding a new one. So that's what the key gives us. And that's basically it. So just to recap, we're looking at what is the structure in Aucerna Execute, we're looking at what is the structure of the data on the source system side, and then we're building a query or a database view that gets it into roughly the right shape for Aucerna Execute. From there, we're mapping the columns between that query or view and the structure in Aucerna Execute. We're identifying what is the key between these two systems, what we're using to link up records. And then, of course, we're setting a schedule. Typically, data synchronizations don't run as kind of a user-facing process. They're usually run in the background. So we're saying we're going to run this nightly, or maybe every hour, or maybe every minute. And that's what we're doing with that. So once we've got all of this, we've got our mapping, we've got our schedule, we've got our query, we can bundle this all up, send it to Aucerna Execute support, and we'll produce a configuration file, a plugin that looks something like this, that incorporates all that information. And from there, the process is drop this into your service, and the service will take over from there. Now, I want to give another really brief example. I've showed how synchronization can be used to to synchronize very simple lists from another system into Aucerna Execute. But they can also be used to update data on existing records, on the bigger records within Aucerna Execute. So another common example is when an AFE becomes closed for spending in the accounting system, we'd like to close the AFE for spending in Aucerna Execute. So similar kind of process, maybe the structure in Aucerna Execute for this. Obviously very simplified here, but we've got closed as a Boolean or a yes or no field, and we have a close date for each AFE. Whereas in the accounting system side, maybe we use different terminology, it's a completed date, and we don't have that Boolean field. So again, we're going to start off looking at what we have in Aucerna Execute. We'll look at what we have in the accounting system, and we're going to build a query or a view that gets those more in line. In this case, it's simple. We're just adding a calculated complete column that is the status of whether or not there is a completed date. Here again, same process. We're setting up a mapping table that maps between our query or view and with the data that's in Aucerna Execute. We're identifying one of those columns, in this case the AFE number, as our key. We're specifying our schedule. And then a nuance here is that we're adding a little bit of extra configuration to say that we don't want to automatically create new AFEs. So when we were looking at our partners example earlier, obviously we would like the behavior to be when a new partner shows up in that source data set, we would like that partner to be created automatically in Aucerna Execute. But in the case of AFEs, we might have historical AFEs that never were in Aucerna Execute. We don't want this integration to automatically see those and then create a brand new, mostly empty, closed AFE from those records. So we change the configuration slightly to say that we're only doing updates with the synchronization. We'll update an existing record, but we'll never create a new one. And that's basically it. So data synchronization in Aucerna Execute really is all about taking data that exists in some other system and pulling that into Aucerna Execute so that we aren't having to rekey it. We're not wasting time doing that, and we're not introducing data errors. Again, the process for any synchronization is the same kind of pattern. We're looking at what we want to fill out, where we're going to get that data from, massaging it a little bit to be in the right shape, and then setting up that mapping exercise. Thank you very much.